guys, today I thought I'd share with you some of my basic houseplant care tips. These are tips that I personally follow and use on a regular basis to keep my plants healthy, happy, and alive, which is the most important of all. Before we get into the video, I do want to note that these are extremely general tips, so these are just basic guidelines I follow with all of my houseplants to keep them relatively happy. But if you do have more rare, or we'll call them dramatic or finicky houseplants, then they may require some more specialized care. So like I said, these aren't going to apply to every single houseplant, just your basic basic well-known houseplants, and a lot of the houseplants that I have in my house as well. So if you've seen my houseplant tour, which I will link in the description, this is what I follow for most of those plants that I show you in the tour. Did any of that make sense? Okay, so first things first. This is the first step I follow to make sure that I'm getting healthy plants to begin with. So you're going to want to pick plants that fit your house requirements. So if you have a corner that you know you want to put a plant and it's a low light corner, you're definitely going to want to research low light houseplants that you can place there. You're not going to want to try and put a high light houseplant in a low light corner. So you just kind of need to know generally where you're going to want to place plants so you can keep your eyes peeled for plants that thrive in those conditions. That's like kind of a basic common sense first step. On that same note, while you're out plant shopping, you're going to want to examine all of the plants in the plant shop. So I frequently shop at Lowe's and Home Depot just because they are right down the street from me, so it's really easy access for me, but they don't always have the plants in the best shape. So make sure you're examining all the plants to find the one that looks the healthiest and the best. Some signs to look for are browning, dryness, mushiness, bugs, extremely wet soil, etc., all sorts of things. You're just going to want to pick the healthiest houseplant. I typically try to find bushier plants that look like they're getting new leaves. That's just kind of a sign that they're happy. So that's what I look for in a plant. Once you have your plants all picked out and purchased and back at home, the very first basic care tip I follow is to repot the plant. I know there's a lot of debate in houseplant groups as to whether you should let the plant acclimate a little bit or immediately repot the plant. In my opinion, it kind of depends on where you're shopping. So where I frequently shop at Lowe's and Home Depot, I do repot the plant instantly and I give them whole new soil, a whole new home. And the reason for that is because oftentimes the soil that are in the pots that I buy the plants in does not dry out. Like, I seriously have waited for soil to dry out for 3 weeks before and it never did, so I ended up repotting it. The reason I really like to repot it right away is because if the soil is not going to dry out, and I don't know what soil is in there, I don't know if there are any bugs in there for certain, and this way I can kind of get a good look at the roots and see the condition the plant is in. But also, I'm not going to have to worry about root rot if I'm putting it in soil that I know is well draining. So when I repot my plants, I make sure to put them in well draining soil. I put all of my plants in the same well draining soil, excluding my orchids. They have their own mix that they get. But I do well draining soil, and then I also mix in a lot of perlite. The reason I do this is in my opinion, I'm not like an expert botanist or whatever they are. I'm not an expert. For me, it just makes sense to have better aerated soil as opposed to soil that just compacts down and crushes my plant and they don't get much airflow down there. So for me, it just makes sense to add a little bit more perlite and just have to water more frequently as opposed to worrying about root rot and crushing the roots and soggy soil and all the nasty, not good stuff. So when you're repotting, you also want to keep in mind that the pot you're planning to put the plant in needs to have a drainage hole. I know a lot of people think that if you put like rocks or pebbles at the bottom of a planter without drainage holes, that'll do the trick and you can just plant the plant right on top of that and the water will drain down. But learn from my mistakes. Do not do this. I seriously killed like 3 or 4 plants using that method just because the water pools obviously at the bottom of the planter in the rocks, and it just can lead to a whole bunch of different issues. So really, if there's a really cute planter that you want to put them in, go ahead and buy it, but make sure that you're also buying a drill bit to drill a hole in it. So they have like diamond drill bits, ceramic drill bits. There's all sorts of drill bits for different materials, but you can go purchase those and drill holes into planters without drainage holes. And really quick side note, who is designing these planters for plants, but they don't put drainage holes? They should consult some plant people before like creating them and make sure that they're fit for houseplants. Who's with me? So, watering. I water my plants when A, the soil is completely dry and I can stick my finger all the way in there and it's completely dry. Or B, when my plant is showing signs of thirst, like drooping, a little bit of drying on the tips of the leaves, all of that kind of stuff. I just keep a really, really good watch on my plants and I can kind of tell when they're getting thirsty. For me, this system is just a lot easier as opposed to saying like Friday is my watering day, because depending on the environment, the weather, I mean, a whole plethora of different factors can play into the soil drying out and things like that. So I just think it's easier to walk around my house every morning and night and see what plants need watered. That way I don't really have to worry about root rot and I'm not overwatering or underwatering my plants. As far as food goes, I do use this food you're seeing on the screen now, and I do dilute it quite a bit like it says on the back of the bottle, and I'll just feed my plants either monthly or bi-monthly, depending on, I don't know if this is scientific or if I made this up in my head, but in my head it makes sense that the bigger the leaves are on the plant, the more food they're going to need. So those are the ones that I will feed bi-monthly. If they have smaller leaves or it's a little bit of a smaller plant, then I'll just feed it monthly. And then also if I notice that the plant isn't growing as quickly as it once did, then I'll kind of amp up how much I'm feeding it that month. So yeah, it really all comes down to getting to know your plants and examining them and just kind of paying attention to their looks. Really, I mean, they'll tell you what they need when they need it if you pay attention. Something else I feel is important as far as like keeping plants alive is house temperature. So my husband and I keep our house at a consistent 68 to 74 degrees. We kind of vary in there depending on the weather outside and if we're going to be home a lot that day, or if we're sleeping. Of course, we put it lower because sleeping in the cold is the best feeling ever. But yeah, we kind of keep it in that range, and that seems to be a comfortable range for most houseplants. So yeah, I mean, I don't do really anything specific for humidity in the house. I do live in a very low humidity state of Utah, so there's like no moisture in this air. But a way that I will try to keep a little bit of moisture in the air is I just have a lot of these little like, what's the word? Decorative. I keep a whole bunch of like decorative bowls and things like that on my plant shelves, and I fill them with water so the water can kind of evaporate and add a little bit of humidity in the air. Obviously it's not much humidity, but it's been working for my plant situation in my home. So my plant routine on a day-to-day basis is I wake up, start the coffee, and then immediately take a lap around my house with my squirt bottle and then also a pitcher full of water, and I'll mist plants that need it and I will water the plants that need it. Like I said, I just stick my finger in the soil and see if it's dry, or I just look for signs of thirst that my plants need watered that day. If they don't, I don't water them. Sometimes I'll notice that I'm not watering plants for like a couple of weeks and it'll still be doing fine. So if I had been watering them more frequently, like every Friday, like we said before, they would have like drowned basically. In my mind. Like I said, this is all made up in my head and I probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but I feel like most of my plants are really happy, so there's maybe some truth to what I'm saying. Follow it at your own risk. Another thing I do when I take my morning and nightly laps around the house to examine my houseplants is I will occasionally go through with a big fork, but if I notice that soil has been extremely compacted or growth is starting to slow down a little bit, then I'll just work the soil a little bit at the base of the plant with the fork, just a little bit extra air can get down there and I know that the plant is able to breathe. Do plants breathe? And so that I know that there's adequate air getting to the roots and the roots aren't being crushed or water isn't gathering at the roots causing root rot. It's just a little bit of an extra way I like to make sure that my plants aren't going to suffer from root rot. The very last tip I have is every few weeks while I'm taking my daily laps around the house, I'll go around with scissors and I'll snip off any ugly or dry bits of plant that don't look too happy. I think this works wonders for keeping my plants happy because I'm trimming off the ugly parts that I don't like to see, and the plant is no longer going to waste energy on those parts of plant. So if I have a crispy leaf on the plant, instead of the plant trying to revive it and come back from that, I just snip it off and they can focus their energy into creating new happy green growth. So those were some basic care tips that I could recommend to you. Like I said before, it's not too in-depth, so if you have any additional, more specific questions, leave them for me in the comments down below and I'll definitely get back to you as quickly as I can. If you have any awesome general plant care tips, also leave them down below. I'm sure other people would love to read through and have input from other people on plant care. I mean, who doesn't want additional tips and tricks and life hacks? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next one. Bye! Woo, my leg